This is the island of Cyprus. This small island in the Mediterranean is probably most well known as a popular tourist destination with its white sand beaches and crystal clear waters. But the island has a somewhat troubled past, and even present as well. Politically, the island is split between the Republic of Cyprus, a member of the UN and the EU, and Northern Cyprus, a self-declared Turkish republic recognised only by Turkey itself, viewed as occupied territory by the rest of the international community. The island of Cyprus is politically, ethnically and physically split through the middle due to its troubled past. A United Nations peacekeeping force has been operating in Cyprus for more than 50 years, with barriers separating the two communities that once shared the island. So why is an island that would seem so tranquil so divided? How exactly did it end up like this? Well, the island became like this due to the dramatic events of 1974, but we need to look a bit further back in the island's history to fully understand the context behind these events. In 1571, the island was conquered by the Ottoman Empire, and for the first time in thousands of years, the island's demographics were changed, from a predominantly Greek population to a Greek majority with a significant Turkish minority. Cyprus was part of the Ottoman Empire for centuries. Treatment of the Greek Cypriots varied significantly during this time, and there were numerous uprisings against Ottoman rule. The Greeks and the Turks rarely lived together in harmony. In the 1820s, Greece, also under Ottoman rule, fought a successful war for independence. The Cypriots revolted at the same time, but their revolt was crushed by the Ottomans. In the year 1878, Cyprus came under British administration in a secret treaty with the Ottomans, in which the British would protect their territorial sovereignty from Russia while securing themselves a strategic position to defend their trade routes to India through the Suez Canal. The Ottomans maintained sovereignty over the island, but it was placed under British administration. In World War I, however, the British and Ottoman empires found themselves on opposing sides, and so the island was annexed by Great Britain. Now, ever since the independence of Greece, the vast majority of Greek Cypriots had been calling for what's known as Enisis, union with Greece. After World War II, it became increasingly difficult for Great Britain to morally justify their extensive empire. All of their colonies that had fought alongside them to fight for the freedom of the world now wanted freedom for themselves. The British Empire did of course go through an extensive period of decolonisation, but with Cyprus there was a problem. The island has been described as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, and geographically speaking, it was just too valuable to give up. From Cyprus, the Royal Air Force could reach 3 different continents with ease. Cyprus is just 100 miles from the Middle East, and the Suez Canal is just 200 nautical miles to the south. Now, while the Greek majority of Cyprus often rebelled against British rule, the Turkish minority were relatively content with it. The Turkish Cypriots absolutely did not want Enisis. In the first decade after the Second World War, the British tried to offer Cyprus self-government without actually giving up any sovereignty. In 1950, a man who would become known in Cyprus as the father of the nation was elected as its leader, Archbishop Makarios III. Of course, this didn't satisfy the Greek Cypriots, and the desire for Enisis grew stronger and more violent. In 1955, a nationalist guerrilla organisation called EOKA was formed to end British rule in Cyprus, with the ultimate goal being union with Greece. The main figurehead behind the Enisis campaign was Colonel George Grievous, a Cyprus-born World War II veteran of the Greek army. In the late 1950s, the British declared a state of emergency on the island of Cyprus as the anti-colonial violence escalated. In 1958, a rival organisation in opposition to EOKA was formed, the TMT, or the Turkish Resistance Organisation, formed by the Turkish minority. Their ultimate goal was the partition of the island, or Taksim. The two communities generally lived in quite segregated neighbourhoods, and the Turkish minority of Cyprus wanted the island to be politically divided. So the Greeks of Cyprus wanted to join Greece, and the Turks wanted to partition the island. In the end, they got what nobody wanted: independence. The president of the republic was to be Greek and the vice president Turkish. The president was Archbishop Makarios, who was actually exiled to the Seychelles in 1957 for his promotion of Enisis, but was allowed to return. The Republic of Cyprus became a country in 1960, but it wasn't really a fully independent country. 3 other countries still had a huge say on what went on the island. the three guarantors of Cyprus that signed the very treaties that gave the country its independence: Greece, Turkey and the United Kingdom. Also, they didn't even have control of the whole island. The British held on to the land around their military bases. The treaties of Cypriot independence banned the country from entering into a union with another country, i.e. no Enisis, and each of the three guarantors had the right to intervene in Cyprus to maintain the status quo. In 1963, President Makarios made a number of proposals for constitutional changes, ostensibly due to government dysfunction, that would remove many of the rights of the Turkish minority. This led to an eruption of ethnic violence between the Greeks and the Turks. Many of the hardliner Ioka sought to rid the island of undesirables, i.e. the Turks. The violence peaked in December in what became known as Bloody Christmas, in which there were hundreds of casualties on both sides. Thousands of Turkish Cypriots were run out of their villages, with many of them leaving the island altogether, and hundreds more were taken hostage. In 1964, a UN resolution was passed to deploy a peacekeeping force to Cyprus, as the island was on the brink of all-out civil war, or worse still, a potential war between two NATO members, Greece and Turkey. Despite the UN force, the violence did not stop. The two communities had to be physically separated in the nation's capital, Nicosia, as British soldiers erected barriers. Now at this point, I'd like to pause for a second to mention another country that was heavily involved in the Cyprus dispute throughout the 60s and the 70s, just not publicly. The United States was very much involved in Cypriot affairs. The CIA operated extensively throughout the island, and the US would often try to covertly pull the strings to get their desired outcome. Since it was becoming obvious that the 1960 solution was not working, London and Washington secretly agreed that a potential way to solve the impasse would be partition of the island. They began to develop a backup plan to encourage Turkey to invade Cyprus and take control of a pre-lineated portion of the island. The invasion didn't happen, at least not yet. But this begs the question, why? Why would the UK and US want to partition the island? Well, this was the 1960s, the height of the Cold War. Having a strong Turkish presence on the island would at least prevent the country of Cyprus from falling into the Soviet zone of influence. The Cypriot president had already caused some controversy by making some connections with Eastern Bloc nations. Having an ally of the Soviets so close to NATO's southern flank would have been disastrous, especially for Turkey, but for NATO as a whole too. Turkey was an extremely important ally of the US. They were quite literally the border between East and West. In 1967, the Greek government was taken over by a far-right military junta and a coup d'etat, ousting the democratically elected Prime Minister. Now, the president of Cyprus had been a strong advocate for Enisis, but he certainly didn't want a union with a military dictatorship in Athens. This caused massive disagreements between himself and George Grievous, still leading the fight for Enisis. Over the next few years, Makarios would be the target of 5 assassination attempts as the Greek Cypriot hardliners tried to overthrow his leadership, as he was unwilling to pursue union with Greece. In 1974, Cyprus intelligence discovered a plan to overthrow the president. This time though, it wasn't from the Greek Cypriots, but from Athens. Yet another military junta had taken over in a counter-coup, and they now had their eyes set on Cyprus. The coup was successfully carried out by the Cyprus National Guard. With the help of the RAF, Archbishop Makarios was flown to London for his safety. He was replaced by Nikos Samson, former member of an Ioka execution squad who fought against British rule in the 1950s. The United States were quietly content that Makarios was out of the picture due to his somewhat tenuous links to communism. It was later revealed that the CIA was well aware of the plot to overthrow the government, but nothing was done to stop it. Turkey was understandably furious with the coup and made clear their intention to invade Cyprus. Turkey cited Article 4 of the Treaty of Guarantee, which states that each of the 3 guaranteeing powers reserves the right to take action with the sole aim of re-establishing the state of affairs created by the present treaty. 5 days after the coup, Turkish troops landed in Cyprus. The initial invasion only lasted 2 days, as an emergency UN Security Council meeting called for a ceasefire. Turkey had captured about 3% of Cypriot territory. Both military dictatorships in Cyprus and in Greece fell apart due to the invasion. Samson resigned just 3 days after the invasion began. Mediation talks in Geneva between the three guarantor powers tried to solve the dispute diplomatically and avoid any further casualties, but the talks became deadlocked. Now at this point, the international community and public opinion were largely sympathetic towards Turkey and the Turkish Cypriots. The Cypriot government had been taken over by a coup with the intention of joining with Greece against the will of the Turkish minority. However, from the 14th of August onwards, things quickly changed. Turkey launched its second invasion of Cyprus, Operation Attila II. This time, it was a full-scale invasion against a much weaker opponent. The fatality numbers reached into the thousands, and about 200,000 Greek Cypriots were forced to abandon their homes. Several Turkish Cypriot community villages were raided by the Greek Cypriot extremist organisation AOKA-B as a response to the invasion, with more than 200 civilian casualties in the first day of the invasion. By the end of the invasion, Turkey had taken control of about 37% of the island of Cyprus. This territory made up approximately 70% of the gross domestic product of the Republic of Cyprus. General sympathy and understanding swiftly turned to almost universal condemnation. The Treaty of Guarantee gave Turkey the right to intervene in Cyprus, but the treaty was made for the purpose of guaranteeing the independence, territorial integrity and security of Cyprus. But in the end, Turkey did the exact opposite. They forcibly took control of a large portion of the island, causing a de facto partition of the country. When looking at how Cyprus became divided, one can't help but wonder, how was this allowed to happen? How was a NATO member allowed to launch a full-scale invasion against another sovereign state? Greece demanded to know why no action was taken to stop Turkey. Realistically, the only country that would have been able to stop the invasion was the United States, but the man who was single-handedly in charge of US foreign policy with regards to Cyprus, Henry Kissinger, chose not to intervene. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He encouraged the invasion. There had been talks of the British pulling out of Cyprus altogether in a round of defence cuts, and Kissinger was worried about having absolutely no NATO presence on the island. Turkey occupying a large part of the island would ensure a NATO presence and prevent Cyprus from falling into the Soviet sphere of influence, so Kissinger was happy to let the invasion run its course. After the conflict was over, the UN organised the transfer of 51,000 Turkish Cypriots from the south to the north as the island became ethnically split. In addition, Turkey proceeded to encourage thousands of Turkish Cypriots from Anatolia to settle in northern Cyprus, despite this being in direct violation of Article 49 of the Geneva Convention. In 1983, the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus was proclaimed and has received absolutely no international recognition except from Turkey itself. In many ways, Cyprus is a victim of its own geography. Its violent past was partly caused by the island's strategic position in the world of geopolitics. Of course, the underlying reason for the violence was the inter-ethnic conflict between the Greeks and the Turks of the island, but this was often willfully ignored or even exacerbated by the West if it were in NATO's best interest. Even to this day, there are tens of thousands of Cypriots still hopeful that one day they will be able to return to their homes from which they were displaced. Cyprus joined the EU as a divided island in 2004, 3 decades after the invasion, and many were hopeful that this would help solve the dispute. In the same year, there had been a referendum on a plan to reunite Cyprus, which ultimately failed. However, there does seem to be a genuine desire among Cypriot citizens to solve the dispute once and for all. It's hard to predict what will happen next. Only time will tell what the future holds for Cyprus. This video is brought to you by Squarespace. If you're ever in need of a website, domain, or online store, look no further than Squarespace. With Squarespace, you can showcase your work, publish your content, sell products or services, promote events or projects, or turn that idea you have into a website. With all the tools you'll need to create a beautiful website, head to squarespace.com/wonderwhy for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code WONDERWHY to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. A huge thank you to Squarespace for their continued support of this channel. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and thank you so much for watching.